Hi, I'm Mack, and I'm on a mission to see the hurting get healed and the healed go out and heal others, in order for all of us to experience the true love and light we desire. This podcast is me sharing my journey with you, so you don't feel alone in your journey. Welcome to the Golden Rule Revolution. Hello, my brothers and sisters, and welcome back to another episode of the Golden Rule Revolution. I am Mack, and thank you for joining. Today, I'm so excited. I have mentioned this man many times on the podcast. It is my friend, Rabbi Shmuel Brody. He's a Hasidic Orthodox rabbi, one of the most spiritually connected, divine human beings and beautiful souls I have ever met. And he walked with me through a very difficult time. I started learning with him every week, studying and learning for many years. And he's just an incredible soul. He's a gift to this world. And I'm excited to introduce him to you. So thank you for listening and enjoy. I'm excited. So let's get rolling. So everyone, you've heard me talk about Rabbi Brody, I don't know how many times on this podcast, and I'm excited to bring him to all of you today. Rabbi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be here with you and all your friends.
I'm so excited. You know, when we met, I was just about to go through the darkest time of my life and studying and learning with you every week. And I really credit it to why I'm here today and help me find what I've always been looking for. And so thank you again for all the time and all the learning together and your friendship. It's been incredible.
Yeah, you're welcome. For me as well, that was very remarkable for me to meet you and to be there. And, earlier in my life, I had the people that were there at exactly the right times to share with me, to lift me, to take me to the next place I would have to go. Without those people, at that point in the journey, also, I would say I would not, become, the person I needed to become.
Well, I'm glad those people invested in you so I could receive the blessing of you investing in me. Do you mind sharing I think, the even just the position of rabbi, if people are not in the Jewish community, don't really understand what it takes to be a rabbi, the amount of learning and studying. So can you share just what your journey has been? I know you come from a family with that lineage, but just where your journey has been.
Well, I would say that, really being a rabbi, it's really just a dedication of learning, which is something that is a hallmark of the Jewish people. We are so fascinated, and I would say obsessed with learning, because learning means growing. Every new idea is a new insight, is a new perception, is a new experience. All of that is really fused into one. And that's something that is, particular to the Jewish people. And so I'm not very different than any other person growing up in that tradition, in that we take that study very seriously. And hopefully we really enjoy it more and more. We find the areas that really speak to us, and we dedicate ourselves to it and study.
When was there a point where you decided to be a rabbi? Was that an expectation growing up in your household? Like when did it become personal for you?
No, as I said, it was really a matter of, being part of a culture of learning. We study with our children, all the time, not just like on Passover, but all the time. And if adults, we're able to generate the interest because we ourselves are passionate about it, and our children also become passionate about it. And if we could speak to their language and interest them, then it becomes, something that we jointly share together. So much less than a position or even a career, it's just the outgrowth of getting more attached to study.
There is so much. I mean, I love you. I love studying. I love learning there's so much brilliance, and someone could read the same thing 100 times and get 100 different perspectives on it. And there's always more and deeper learning. Is that, in Judaism, obviously, there's Orthodox, which still can keep some more of that more tradition and culture versus the Aish, like cultivating that fire in the Hasidic path. Like what is keeping the younger generation like you lead? I look at you as you're a younger rabbi, and then your children, like when did you cultivate that Aish, that fire inside of you?
Yeah, it's a really important question.
Yeah.
I think in the age of maturity, in your later teenage years when you're developing as a person, so you take what you absorbed, which is just, how you were raised, how you grew up, and you start to want to, personalize it and make a, personal connection with it. It's at that point where hopefully people will turn and ask the question, what's my connection to this? How do I find the passion in this? So, for example, the Hasidic path, the context of it is in the traditional path, what people call Orthodox, but I would just call the tradition of the Jewish people, except it has a very particular path within that, which is study of the Hasidic teachings, which do create that Aish, that fire.
Yes.
Ideas that are really not just cerebral, they really impact and fuse with the person's emotions. Yes. And ignite the emotions. Yes. So that person can find that, wow, you can actually feel feelings for God. Yes. Like, wow, I thought I just felt feelings for myself, or, things I enjoy or people I enjoy. But no, actually, we could find that these emotions can be ignited toward God. So in those later years, later teenage years, 18, 19, when you're kind of finding yourself, hopefully the person starts to turn their question in a spiritual way as well.
It's incredible the feeling, like being at the shul where people are even learning together, even if it's in quiet space, it's still, there's this, I don't know, pulling or drawing people closer to God, to Hashem. And, so Hashem is commonly used for the name of God, but explain to people like why it is important to say Hashem, where that derives from. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, you're describing the shul, and, the Jewish people are primarily a people because of the Torah. That relationship that we have to God through the Torah, that is not bound by any particular place. And that's why we've remained a very people, mysteriously and almost unexplainably, wherever we've gone, and under circumstances that are really not to be believed if you study the history in the particular. At the same time, the place that we call the shul is a remarkable place, as you say. There is something, we describe it in the Talmud as a small temple. And if in the temple there was a pervasive sense of God that was really palpable, that we call the Shekhinah, the divine presence, every person, no matter your spiritual place, had contact and can sense that. From people that were really not usually connected to that, to people that were intimately and constantly connected to that. And
Mm.
in a small way, the shul has that. A shul which dedicates itself toward service. When you walk in there, like as you say, whether you're by yourself,
Yeah.
there's that pervasive presence. And certainly when you're with people like-minded,
Yes.
just people are studying or definitely praying, you can feel sort of the vibrancy of the energy there.
Yeah.
And the name of God, we call Hashem the name because of the reverence we have for the actual name of God. And
Mm.
the actual name of God essentially is an experience of God. As a name is descriptive of something, a name of God is something that a descriptive experience of how God is manifest to us. So we call it this name or that name or this name means if you can name something, it means that you get it well enough, you can call it something.
Mm.
And even though God is unknowable and ineffable,
Yeah.
at the same time, God makes himself relatable and knowable. And that's why we have a name.
It's beautiful. That Rabbi Ari Kaplan, he wrote this book. Brian my brother-in-law gave it to me years ago, and he has this great line in this book. He says, "It is right to say to the atheist, the same God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either." Because whatever construct you have of God, that is not God. God is, like you said, ineffable. But that's such a also beautiful thing to say, is he makes himself relatable in these attributes that we can know as much as we want to find or seek.
Yes.
So one of the coolest things I have incorporated it into the men's retreats that I lead, is a silent hike. That was the first time I've ever been with another person, with you, where there's no talking and just a meditative walk. And I remember the first time, I was like, my mind was everywhere. I was like worried about the car. It was dark. And then there was just this point where I settled in, and I had such a profound, deep experience of being present, to being aware of all that is, and being with you was so beautiful. Where did you learn that practice?
So, I think this is one of the, I guess, trickiest things and maybe one of the biggest doors that is placed in front of people when it comes to a spiritual or religious experience. It's, on the one hand, we come with a very deep tradition, and that tradition informs us of so much. I mean, when we study, we don't start with our own ideas. We mine the text, but with the humility that great people were able to discern things in between the words. Mm. And so we study that. At the same time, every person has a soul. And the soul is a means for a person to be able to connect to the divine in a similar way that, our different senses allow us to connect to the things that we sense in the physical world. And we honor that. So, there is I guess trial and error. A person has to kind of just try and experience different things. Open yourself up to different possibilities. And I would say among the Hasidim, if you go to the Hasidic traditions, you step into that world. And it may not be, the 1800s in Europe any longer, but they have maintained that to a degree. And when you step into that world, you experience things that you've never experienced before. And when you experience them as a community, all of a sudden, as an individual, you can now find those things within yourself. But those experiences weren't available to you just walking down the street, going to the dry cleaners, going into your office. The normal consciousness and things that we think about, that doesn't become available to us. But when we step back into that world, people are doing that, studying that, experiencing that together as a community, all of a sudden you can find it for yourself. So in a similar way with silence, silence, as the Psalms say, to you, silence is praise. One of the interpretations is by being silent, we can find the praise of God. We could, discover things within ourselves.
Mm.
So I would say, yeah, among the Hasidim, particularly on Shabbos, the third meal, that was something I learned.
Mm. It's powerful. It's powerful. Really, it's one of the coolest things. And especially silence with another person. I mean, how many times, I don't know, I had never done that. Just to be, I've been silent with myself. I've been in the woods, I've been on hikes, but to be with another person and to let go of what another person is thinking of. I mean, that was the big thing for me, is it doesn't matter what you think of me in that moment. It's just coming back into that we're both here in this moment. And it was so powerful. Rabbi, it's powerful. And then when I lead these men's retreats, I tell the guys, they don't know what's about that. I don't let them know what happens throughout the retreat, because I want them to experience it and have a visceral reaction to whatever's coming. And I said, all right, guys, we're going to go on a hike, but here's the rules. Literally, no one can say a word. Do not say a word. Do not utter a peep. And I said, even if people will come by you and say hi, you can acknowledge them with your eyes, but keep walking. And it is when they come back from the hike and they talk about the same process almost that I had, like worrying about everything else. And then boom, something happens, and it's a deep knowing of themselves and where they are in relation to everything else. So it's really beautiful practice.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things that you said to me in the spiritual world, the non-Jewish spiritual world, people throw the word Kabbalah out a lot, and it became popularized, I think, by Hollywood and a lot of that stuff. But you said something to me one time, and I think it's one of the teachings, that you don't get the Kabbalah books until you've really learned, grounded on Torah itself. Do you remember sharing that, or is that practice? Can you explain that? Because I think that's really important, to be grounded in Torah before you play with fires, spiritually speaking.
Yeah. I think that there is a lure of the Kabbalah, and there's probably something beneficial of just about that lure. That means that there's promise, and people want to come in contact with something that's different. Sometimes it's not healthy because people think of it as in a magical way or in a healing way. That may represent the unhealthy, but the healthy is that there's something that's sort of on the edge of our consciousness, that we have a sense that there's something beyond wherever we're at, and we're grasping for that. And so, like in every tradition, you have to build things gradually, or in any science or anything you study, you have to build things gradually to really have a healthy and proper relationship with it. Well, it's a similar thing in the study and practice of spirituality. Hasidus would represent the core ideas of the Kabbalah as they're expressed in the human experience that is accessible. So if people are kind of reaching for that, I would say the address to that is the Hasidic teachings, which are very appropriate for any beginner to start with.
Powerful. What I don't know, there's so many questions I want to ask you, and usually I don't do like straight interview questions like this, but I could ask you a million questions, and I think it's so fascinating for people to get the opportunity to hear from you and to learn, more about a world that many they're not familiar with and never get the opportunity to hear about. So for instance, like Lauren grew up Reform, there is a movement though. I see this like with Brian and Brian's friends, like this coming back to this real powerful relationship with Torah and relationship with the divine again. And what are you seeing in the Jewish community, and I think is also reflected in the world at large?
Yeah, within the Jewish community, there has certainly been a lot of momentum toward the spiritual teachings. There's a richness that people look for in all traditions, and certainly Jewish people, that is, they're looking for something very connective.
Mm.
And you know what it is when you meet it, you know, in a similar way that people don't want to be alone, you know,
Mm.
nobody wants to be alone in the world. Um, and how rich it is to share life with someone. In a similar way, maybe even greater, people don't want to experience that loneliness.
Mm.
And when you have that contact, um, you know, whether it's through saying the Psalms or through praying or through study, you know what it is. You've met something,
Mm.
and that something is so real. And when you contrast that to other parts of your life, it demands, it calls for you to pay attention to it. You cannot not pay attention to it.
Mm.
It is too true of an experience and too filling of what uh, a person's looking for, that it calls to you. And that we are seeing within the observant world, and also in people that are not. When you make contact with that, you need to pay attention.
Mm. Yeah, you can't forget it. I think I've shared this with you. I say this quote often, but this old preacher said, "A man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument." And once you experience it, once you have that encounter, that's everything. And that's why I think it's so powerful. The Hasidic path is just, I feel it. Um, one of the things that's coming up, there's the different holidays in the Jewish religion. We have Pesach coming up, Passover, but we just had Purim. And can you explain the difference between Torah holidays and then the rabbinic holidays, or the other traditional holidays? Because I find this really fascinating.
Well, you know, really, the holidays of the Torah are described as 3 times a year you will come see my face.
Hmm.
So even though each holiday has its own regiment of offerings that the Torah speaks about and some mitzvos, primarily it's identified as 3 times a year will come to see my face. And
Hmm.
that is very telling of what it is, which means that there are 3 opportunities or times in the year that when you're going to get a exposure or an encounter that you will not get other times of the year, which means that what we call Zman, time itself, affords that. That's without, you know, you really doing so much. The time itself provides it. It's similar to the Shabbos. When the seventh day comes around, you enter into a certain space that the space itself, provided by the time, is providing a certain sense, a certain experience.
Hmm.
And that's really what Yom Tov, or the holidays, are about. Each one's got its own particular emphasis. The sages added 2 holidays, and in a similar way, they do that type of thing, not to the same degree, but in a similar way, they do that, Purim and Hanukkah.
Hmm. So the holidays, there's always a return, or that's been um, what is return again? What's the word in Hebrew? It's
You mean Teshuvah?
yeah, teshuva. Yes. So we always have bechira is choice, right? Or how do you say choice?
Yes.
Bechira.
Yes.
Okay, so we always have a choice under the law of free will to return back to that, the essence of who we really are, who we truly are. And one of the beautiful things is talking about the soul and the neshama and the breath of God, and like coming back to just being present in our breath is so incredible. And the Yom Tovs are a great time to be present and to remember the gifts that we have. So as we enter the season of Pesach, can you explain that story to maybe to someone who's never heard it before? What is the story of Pesach and the great power that comes from that?
Yeah, this is really the story of you know, the making of a people, and that's, you know, pretty interesting. how a people is made. Um, it's the story of explicitly showing and revealing God's himself,
Mm.
and as a result of that, his taking for himself a people, and so both the peoplehood of the Jewish people came into being on Pesach, and with that, some dramatic choices of leaving behind the land of Egypt. And anytime a person leaves something behind that's really painful, there's also a certain comfort they're leaving behind.
Mm.
So on the one hand, everyone's like, well, that's obvious. You leave something painful. On the other hand, it's not, because everything that's painful is also something that we're comfortable with. And we're going into something that's really unknown, and we're losing the attachment, the security, in a sense, as strange as it is, as the painful environment.
Yeah.
So leaving Egypt as a people was very difficult. And you'll see throughout the Torah, the people come back to it again and again. We remember this. Why'd you take us out to Egypt to be killed? Do you remember when in Egypt this? The
Right.
people, on one hand, were not so happy with Moshe about leaving Egypt. And you're like, what? What are you talking about? I mean, you were enslaved. It was a Holocaust in Egypt.
Yeah.
But you can see it's really not easy. And in the personal experience, everyone knows that when you leave something, take an addiction. People leave an addiction. The addiction is really killing them, but it doesn't make a difference. The addiction, so there's a certain amount of comfort that makes it very difficult to leave.
Mm.
So Pesach is about leaving difficult circumstances that take a certain amount of courage to depart from as well.
Wow. And with the remembering, what is recalling and telling that story? Like, we will tell the story with our kids. We'll do a Seder. But what is remembering? What's the power in being reminded? Because I think that's a huge key to this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, when we talk about remembering, we actually mean forgetting. Like when we say, oh yeah, I remember, what we actually mean is we've forgotten until this very moment. That's not really remembering. Remembering really means to be always conscious of something. Now, that's pretty difficult, but that's really what it means to remember. Zechira in Hebrew is to be conscious of something always, that's always in your memory, always there. So, for example, the leaving of Egypt is so central, so significant to the Jewish people. It's something that we're always supposed to be connected to. However, one day of the year, one night of the year, we're supposed to be really, really connected to that. Well, we actually undergo the experience of it. And that really requires every person to really close their eyes and to be there, to say the words, to sink themselves into the words, to reconnect with something that is really timeless.
It's Moshe is such a, he's, how would you describe Moshe as, like, in perspective to the faith?
That's an interesting question. Well, Moshe, of course, is the giver of the Torah.
Yeah.
He's the one that the Torah passes through, and it's because of our knowledge that Moshe is a true prophet that we accept the Torah as being something that is truthful. Moshe, as a person, that's like the impossible.
Yeah. Not to be replicated.
That's the impossible. That's like living that's like the impossible. That's that's really, it's like not something I'd ever want to be. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's like something that you do want to be. Like the position is impossible, but but the place he reached, the person he was, is everything. So, Moshe is the way through how Torah is transmitted to us. The most common verse in the Torah is God spoke to Moshe saying. It comes through Moshe. So whenever we study Torah, we're going back to the ones that really transmit it, and that's Moshe.
Mm. And I have the Mishnah Torah here, one of the Seders, and we were going through that, and that is an amazing commentary. So can you explain, there's the Torah, there's the Mishnah Torah, and how, and even the word Talmud gets thrown around, I think, and people like, oh yeah, Jewish people study the Talmud, but the Talmud's commentary upon commentary of the Torah, right?
Yeah, look, the Torah is a multi-layered document. When you look at it, all you have is the words, let's say the Bible. But what's there? What lies, beneath it, both in terms of study as well as in the experience of it. So much. So all these words are the layered explanations, the layered teachings of what is meant in the utterance of God. So that one word, there's so much within it. There's so much in terms of the experience of the word, what it is, to its meanings. For example, Nachmanides says that the Torah in its totality is just names of God. So on the one hand, it's the most mystical thing. It's all the names of God. On the other hand, it's got very particular and very precise meaning in terms of what the mitzvah is, how one does it, how one lives it. So in between, that names of God, and then in between the particular mitzvah is this whole, multi layers of Torah. So the Mishnah Torah, the Talmud, these are all sections of what we would call the oral Torah, which is simply how this Torah is understood, how it's explained. And that comes transmitted down through a transmission from the prophets to the sages, to their own explanations based on ways of expounding it, of how we sort of mine the Torah to bring out all its, various teachings.
Awesome. It's awesome. So with Pesach coming up, the Passover, one of the beautiful things about Passover is it's done the exact same way in every Jewish home around the world. And it's been that way since how long? I mean, since Moshe, since the actual Passover.
Yes, since 2448 from creation, and the Torah said you should, keep this, and every spring you should do these. You should do these practices. And when your children will ask you, what are you doing? You'll respond and say, because God took us out of Egypt. So we've got the source of it right there in the Torah, in Exodus 12.
It's amazing. What do you think? I don't know if I've ever asked you this or we ever learned this together. So Daniel has the prophecy of the statue, the head of gold, the chest of bronze, the legs of, or the waist of maybe iron, and then the feet of iron and clay. And I always looked at those as the four kingdoms that basically persecuted the Jewish people. And then the Mashiach comes and destroys that idol or that statue. But where, I've always wondered, why isn't Egypt mentioned in that? Was it because it had already happened essentially? And those were the kingdoms of present to future. I always wondered why Egypt wasn't included in that concept.
That's a great question. Actually, that prophecy of the four kingdoms is throughout the Torah, the prophets, and the scripture, many, many forms. In the book of Zechariah, Zechariah has it, as well as Daniel, and it's scattered in many places. But on the first place, one of the earliest places is when God foretold to Abraham the impending bondage and exodus of Egypt. And laden within that prophecy, the sages derive these four exiles contained in the darkness that Abraham experienced. And behold, a terrible, dreadful darkness fell over him, as being indicative of these four exiles. So actually, they're all contained within Egypt. Egypt, in a sense, is the mother of all exiles. When everything is sort of off and everything is wrong or out of place, finds its source in Egypt.
That's amazing. And then the age of Mashiach, that's what that is the age where the big return happens and everyone returns. I was talking to someone the other day that there's all these different prophecies of these different religions of the world that all kind of correspond around the same time. We just entered the age of Aquarius. Astronomically, there's the prophecy of the golden age. Christianity has the millennial reign of Christ, that these 1,000-year time period on the earth where the lion lays with the lamb, that there is no more suffering, that there is this beauty. What in the Torah, Talmud, or the teachings, like what precedes, or when does the age of Mashiach come in Judaism, or is that a focal point, or because there is what is the age of Mashiach? Perhaps maybe start with that.
Well, there is a era called the Yemos HaMashiach, the days of Mashiach. So it's identified as an era. Well, it's one of those nebulous things.
Yeah.
Daniel himself was told to, conceal the prophecy in the book, a time, and half a time. And he was told deliberately to make it confusing, which tells us that it's not supposed to be a focal point, the particular time, but it is replete, as you say, throughout the prophets, a call of a great return that will happen, that will come. And so, we have spent less time focusing on the particulars of the age, but very worthwhile to see these prophecies in the actual scripture, to see them as they are said to unfold.
Yeah. And which is also so important to what is the word when we cling on or attach? What is the word for attachment?
Vekos.
Yeah, vekos. So like the more we cultivate and attach ourselves to Hashem in this time, when that time comes, whether we're alive or not alive, if we happen to be alive, what a beautiful thing that we are attached greatly to that and can step into that age. Like, hey, I'm already here. I'm already doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, there's a great story with one of the great Hasidic masters, I believe of Mendel of Vitebsk, who was told that the Messiah had come. And he took his head and he leaned out the window and smelled the air, and he said, no, he has not yet come. And they say, well, why he had to take his head and go out the window to smell the air to discern if Mashiach had come or not, because in his own atmosphere, the Mashiach had come. In his own personal space, the wholeness, the completion of what the Mashiach is supposed to bring was happening within his area, his own self, his family, his Beis HaMedrash. That was already had arrived at that time.
That's powerful. That's beautiful. You do I learned so much from you and learning, and you're also coaching individuals and life coach. You're certified life coach. Talk about that process too, like what people are getting from having that accountability and having someone to speak into their life and help them navigate from where they are to where they want to go.
Yeah, as I see many people when they hit their late 20s or middle 30s, things that they were able to ignore, they could no longer ignore. And I see this time and time again. So often it's the pain of childhood, to varying degrees, from significant trauma to less. These are experiences usually with a father or a mother that they were able to ignore up to a certain point, but now they can no longer ignore it. And it's definitely making a difference. They're finding some pain, and this manifests in different ways, whether it's in a relationship with their own children, or their work, or their spouse. They've come out to a point where they can no longer ignore it, and that is mostly the type of work that I'm doing with people.
It's powerful. I was thinking, remember I'd be sick a lot. I'd have to cancel our learnings because I wasn't feeling well. All that was a byproduct of the trauma that I was not, because I haven't been sick. I mean, I can't even remember last time I was sick, let alone consistently, like every almost daily waking up. And it's been beautiful that the more emotional healing that we bring forth, the physical healing manifests from that. And there's so much to what you're doing, because you're helping those people. It's not just emotions, but our bodies are just mirrors to, I think, where our soul's health is inside of us.
Yes, precisely. Many people are experiencing this type of body pain, backaches, a lot of anxiety and feelings in the chest, and that just indicates to us that these are emotions that have not been dealt with directly, and have gone into the body, and that's where they are. And there's nothing like working that through. There's nothing like working that process through to come to liberation. Pesach.
Amazing. So I'm going to put your contact info in the show notes so people can reach out to you and hopefully hire you as a coach and speak into their lives as you've spoken to mine, which is so beautiful. But before we wrap, have you had Hava whiskey yet? Do you know that Nassim came out with his own whiskey called Hava, and I just ordered a couple bottles. So when that comes, you and I can have a l'chaim with a little Hava.
Yeah, I'd love to taste that.
And for everyone listening, if you haven't heard of Nassim Black, search him on YouTube or any music channel. And Nassim is a beautiful Black brother from Seattle who converted to Orthodox Judaism, or converted to Judaism, and has gone down the Hasidic path. And what an incredible, and Rabbi Brody, you had that opportunity to walk with him during that. What was that like for you? And to see especially who he's become, this kind of unique icon in the whole, in Israel.
It was really, really awesome. Both Nissim and his brother-in-law, Yosef. The type of sincerity, the type of energy that they would bring to the synagogue, was awesome. The prayers were just totally aflame from the two of them and people that were there. And it's really awesome. And then to be able to go through that, and then to be a mentor as he is to other people, that is, I think that's great. That's, kind of like how we began, I was there for you. Others were there for me.
Yes.
Well, others were there for him. He's now there for others.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, I love you, and I'm so thankful for you, and thanks for coming on the podcast and just sharing. And I just blessings upon blessings. That's it.
Thank you, Lucas. I love you too, and you're a big blessing to your audience. To have that radiant presence really gives lifts people up, and who knows where a person is and what they need, and what that gives them. It is got such value.
Thanks. Thanks, Rabbi. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that podcast. Rabbi Brody, thank you so much again for coming on. And everyone, thank you. I hope, my desire is that you are detaching if you're feeling low vibrations, you're standing in your own power, you're releasing fear, you're speaking affirmations over yourself, you're receiving the infinite and unconditional love that is available for you right now, right here. The darkness lost. The darkness lost. Just know that, repeat it, light wins. Perfect love casts out all fear. God wins. We are on the side of light and love, and that is the greatest truth and greatest gift that we could have ever received. So everyone, thank you so much. I bless you all. I will talk to you on the next episode. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening. For support in your journey, go to my website, lucasmack.com.